With the NFL offseason now in full swing, we are shifting our focus to these rookies. We're going to go through what the first 2 rounds of a rookie SuperFlex draft should look like at this point. Obviously, it is just your introduction to these rookies. We still have the combine coming up. We still have the NFL draft. We still have free agency. So there's a lot of variables, but some of you guys are out there kicking off drafts already in your dynasty leagues. So we're bringing it to you right now. Tyler, when we did the top 20 picks of dynasty drafts last time, you had the first pick. So I'm going to take the first pick of our rookie draft, and I'm not going to get cute with it. I know it's super flex, but I think it's Ashton Genty. I don't really think there's a conversation for this one. I think he's pretty clear-cut the 101, at least for me, what he did this season, putting up over 2,000 yards, almost, touching Barry Sanders' record, had 374 attempts in 14 games, which is just absolutely ridiculous, averaging 7 yards an attempt, 29 rushing touchdowns. But he's going to be a first-round pick. Would love to see him. You brought this up when we talked about the top 20 picks. Chicago Bear. Oh please, please. He would be the easiest 101 pick. I think, we'd have in a little while. I guess Bijan was probably up there. But Ty, do you agree? Do you disagree? Would you have put one of those quarterbacks higher, or do you think it's Ashton Genty here?
No, it should be Ashton Genty. And I think it's kind of twofold. The first part is that this quarterback class really, at the top with Cam Ward and Shedeur Sanders just doesn't offer the same intrigue, you could say, but also the same kind of mystique that an Ashton Genty does, right? Where Genty could land in a spot like you said, Chicago or Dallas, and be an immediate fantasy contributor versus Cam Ward and Shedeur Sanders. And you look at the situations that they're going to be going into, there is a lot more risk with those guys than Ashton Genty.
For sure. All right. So who do you have then as the 102?
Pretty chalk to start things off. I'm going to go with Tetaroa McMillan. I kind of shocked the fellas with this the other day. Tetaroa is not my wide receiver 1 based on film. But there are certain things about Ted McMillan, like his size and his physicality, that will boost him up the draft board. He will be, it's the great debate of what Travis Hunter is going to play. Is he going to be a receiver? Is he going to be a corner? Is he still going to play both? Who knows? But I think from just an every down standpoint, Ted McMillan is going to be the wide receiver 1. Like I said earlier, size, physicality, some good route running chops as well. Ted McMillan is really the clear wide receiver 1 in this rookie class when it comes from a fantasy standpoint. So again, pretty chalk to start things off, going Genty and then McMillan.
For sure. Now, I think this is where I kind of get into the quarterbacks. I'm going to take a quarterback here. And I do want to say, I know a lot of times we try to say like landing spots shouldn't shift too much for you, right? Mm-hmm. Based off play. Like it'll shift a little bit, but especially for these top guys. But for me, it really is going to depend on, for these quarterbacks, where they land. Because I think landing spot in this draft can really make or break these 2 top guys, Cam Ward, Shedeur Sanders' careers. Right. I think you end up in the wrong spot. It could absolutely tank what you got. But with that being said, the quarterback that I'm going to take here is Cam Ward. I think he offers just a little bit more rushing upside. Right. He'd run the ball, but he's not like a scrambler at the same time. You know what I mean? Like he's not Jay Daniels by any means. But he does use his feet. He's got terrific arm talent. Like that is always on display. It's just, is he going to be able to develop into an NFL quarterback, right? Is he going to be able to get the ball out quickly? Is he going to be able to make the right decisions? But yeah, I think, it'd be interesting if he went to like a New York Giants with Brian Dable, with Malik Neighbors. If he was a Raider, that would be interesting to me, just because it's, you look at he's got Pete Carroll, Tom Brady, Brock Bowers, but it's also the Las Vegas, right? I think you're going to be him and Han no matter where he goes, because he's going to probably be a top 7 pick at the worst, probably even, closer to the top 3. But yeah, do you have any gripes there with Cam Ward going that high? Would you have gone a different direction, or how do you look at that?
It's really between three guys, including Cam Ward. It's Shedeur Sanders and Luther Burden, I think, are the next like three guys. I think for Superflex, it's understandable to go Cam Ward here because, again, for the gunslinger that he is, if he does land in a situation with a coach that is willing to let him kind of air it out a little bit more, like Vegas is an interesting one because, again, like you don't have like great weapons outside of Brock Bowers. Chip Kelly is going to be your offensive coordinator too.
Yeah.
So, but then you look at a team like Cleveland where you've got Kevin Stefanski offense, don't really have great weapons. Like, yeah, you had David Njoku and Jerry Jeudy, but
Jerry
like,
Judy. Thank you
well,
very
stop
much.
it. Stop it. This is not a praise episode for Jerry Jeudy, even though you want a victory lap at all that you want. But that would be interesting because I find that offense would be more QB friendly, although they need to figure out their offensive line. So I think, like you said, the landing spot will kind of dictate how the next three players will go.
For sure. All right. Then, so now that you've kind of explained, we know it's between Luther Burden and Shedeur Sanders for you. Who would you take at the 104?
Gosh, I am so torn. I wish I actually took the odd picks here because then I wouldn't be in this spot. Let's go under the assumption that Cam Ward goes to Tennessee, right, with the first pick.
Okay.
Shedeur Sanders is likely going to the Giants then, in my opinion. I don't think he's going to want to go to the Browns. So then it's Luther Burden, who's going to be kind of mid first round pick, wide receiver 2 probably on a team. If he does find the perfect spot, then he's the wide receiver 1. I think I'm going to go with Shedeur here. Okay. I know I like Luther Burden as a player more than Shedeur Sanders, but I think because, again, it is a super flex, you do have to push the QBs a little higher on a draft board.
For sure. No, and I think that is the right pick there. I will take your guy then. I won't leave you hanging. I'll make sure he's the next guy up. I'll take Luther Burden. He's dynamic. You're going to hear a lot about he was just using design. He just had design plays the whole time, right? He was a lot of screens, a lot of stuff around, the line of scrimmage. He was using, the run game a little bit and sweeps. But that's just because Missouri was not a good football team this year. Right? They just didn't have the team that could utilize him in a way that truly made sense. And so I think, you look back at 2023 when he had 86 receptions for 1,200 yards. I think that's a lot more what we could see from him. I shouldn't say what we can see from him, but I think that's a lot more telling of the kind of player that he is. Football guys put out, they have his player comparison as DJ Moore, which, I find interesting, but he's a guy who's going to be really good with the ball in his hands. He's a great athlete. He's going to be a yak monster no matter where he is. But like you said, he's going to fit perfectly on a team in that, middle of the first round. It'll just be the question of then, can he eventually become a wide receiver 1 on a team? Or is he consistently going to be that wide receiver 2, right? Because we've seen it, some of these guys, wide receiver 2s right now, like the Jalen Waddles, Devonta Smiths, where they're fantastic fantasy assets, but they're never going to crack. They're not going to consistently crack the top 12. Right. They're kind of between that 12 to 24 range where they just don't have that upside to get to the top 12 because they have a wide receiver 1 ahead of them. Not to say like Jalen Waddle, Devonta Smith can't eventually be wide receiver 1s, but it'll be interesting to see if Luther Burden can kind of crack into that.
Yeah, Luther's an interesting one because, again, there was a lot of pre-snap motions that he was sent on. So he wasn't exactly like the route winner that you thought he could be, right? When you see the production and all that kind of stuff. But that being said, when he gets the ball in his hands, he is dynamic. Like he's a big play waiting to happen. So he may not be, he could be another Devonta Smith, Jalen Waddle type where he can be a wide receiver 1 on 31 other teams, but it's because of the team that he's on that he's going to be the 1B in that offense.
Yep, for sure. All righty. Who do you got with the 6th pick?
I don't know why more people aren't in on this guy. I'm going Tyler Warren. I don't It boggles my
Wow.
mind why people
Okay.
because again, I think people think like tight end and rookie tight ends don't do well in fantasy. And I'm not going to sit here and say that like, well, look at Brock Bowers, look at Sam Laporta, like there's a trend. That's not what I'm saying at all. Tyler Warren is like the most complete package that we've seen from a tight end prospect in years, right? Like Brock Bowers, we had concerns about his size and that, he's going to be more receiving than a down to down tight end because of blocking issues with his size and all that stuff. Kyle Pitts, same thing, receiving upside, but you've seen it now in Atlanta. They don't trust him to be anything other than a pass catcher, right? Tyler Warren can do everything. You saw that in Penn State where they lined him up all over the field and they literally gave him carries out of the backfields. Like Tyler Warren, I don't want to sit here and say that it's a generational prospect because that is a big label to throw on a prospect like Tyler Warren. But gosh darn it, like Tyler Warren is one of the best players in this draft. And I think people are they're predicting the downfall of the rookie tight ends, right? They think that, again, the Sam Laportas, Brock Bowers are the anomaly. So we're going to come back down to earth. I don't see that happening. Even though Tyler Warren may not be the tight end one in his rookie year, if he is a top 5 tight end, that's an advantage over every other, most other teams in your league.
So I'm listening to you and I'm hearing carries out of the backfield. So I would assume, you're getting excited about that. Your player comp is probably Taysom Hill then for Tyler Warren. I assume that's what you're getting at there. Generational then would be the right word. But no, I mean, like you got to remember, this guy had 3, tight ends that were drafted the NFL ahead of him. So you're going to hear about like young breakout age with tight ends. If you really get into the weeds, a lot of guys like to use it. When you got 3 NFL tight ends drafted ahead of you in your time at Penn State, it makes sense that you're not going to break out at 18 years old. He was also a high school quarterback. So he transitioned to tight end and then just happens to be, 6'4", 250 pounds and just an athletic freak. So I think it's a little higher than I probably would have gone with Tyler Warren. But at the same time, I understand where you're coming from. And if he hits, right, and especially the way that you're projecting him to hit, Ty, you look back at this last, draft class, you would have taken Brock Bowers probably like the 103. And so, if Tyler Warren's up in that same echelon of players, he's going to look probably that we should have even taken him higher.
I mean, just recklessly speculate landing spots quick. If he goes to the Jets, I love that spot for him. If he goes to a team, let's see, Miami, Jonnu Smith. If he goes to the Colts, like that's another weapon for, again, a Shane Steichen offense that you get excited about. Cincinnati, if he falls that far to Cincinnati and Cincinnati moves on from T. Higgins, boy, like Tyler Warren, I don't want to sit here and say that like he's got to find the right spot because you can say that about every one of these guys. But if Tyler Warren gets into one of these more fantasy friendly offenses, brother, like watch out then.
For sure. All right. I'm going to go with a running back here and I'm going to go with Travion Henderson.
Ooh.
And I know a lot of people are going to want Omarion Hampton here. And I understand he's probably the better pure rusher. But at this point, when we don't know landing spots, I'm going to take Travion Henderson just because we've seen so many second round. Zach Charbonnet, for example, he was a good prospect, early second round pick, goes to the Seattle Seahawks, right? He's not playing like a 1B role where I think Travion Henderson has more receiving upside. So even if he finds himself in that situation, they're going to find a way to get him on the field. Now, if he finds himself in a Kansas City offense, a Dallas offense, or if he's even with the Chicago Bears, right? You get super excited about him there. But, averaging over 7 yards per attempt, people are going to say, well, he had to split the backfield the whole time. Well, yeah, that's because Quinshon Judkins is going to be probably a day 2 pick as well, right? When you have 2 day 2 picks in your backfield, you're going to split time between the 2 of them. I do think he has what it takes to eventually be a 3-down back. But just looking at where the NFL is going, so many teams aren't using true 3-down backs anymore. They're using these split backfields. And I think Travion Henderson has the most tools to succeed in that kind of backfield. So that's why I would take him this high when we don't know landing spot.
Yeah, Travion's an interesting one because there is a path where he can be running back 1 right out of the gate, depending on the team that he goes to. Travion could also be a running back that starts his rookie year in a split backfield, and then he's then the running back that the fantasy community is like, screaming from the rooftops. So like give him the backfield, like another like Tony Pollard-esque, argument, right? Where we're just like, give him the majority of the workload and watch what happens. So there's a wide range of outcomes for Travion when it comes to fantasy. But when you just look at the fact with his speed, his home run ability, he's really, I find him to be one of these running backs that it's going to be hard for him to fail, because again, I don't see there's a situation where he's going to be set up to fail.
For sure. All righty. 108. Ty, who are you taking here?
This is Omari and Hampton to me. I think there's certainly an argument for Hampton to go ahead of Travion, and there's certainly an argument for Travion to go ahead of Omari and Hampton. I think people are just not aware of how good he is as well, because I think a lot of people just hear Ashton Genty and then they see Travion just because he went to Ohio State, and then you hear like Caleb Johnson from Iowa, and you hear Dylan Sampson from Tennessee, now Omari and Hampton from North Carolina. I just want to give you some of these stats from this past year. The dude was 10th in all of college football in missed tackles forced with 72 in 12 games. He was tied for fourth with carries of 15 or more yards with 26. He had an elite 4.35 yards after contact per attempt. PFF tracks an elusive rating, or they score an elusive rating, 126.8, which is also elite of all running backs with 100 plus attempts. Omari and Hampton averaging nearly 6 yards a carry, as well as getting 38 receptions. If you can get that kind of receiving production with that talent as a carrier, Omari and Hampton could quite literally be like the steal of the draft. And it's not because people don't think that he's talented. It's just because, again, you look at the board in front of him, there's other talent in front of him, right? But Omari and Hampton could quite literally be, again, the jewel of this draft class, because of where he goes. Could land in a better offense because a lot of people project him to be a late first round pick. So if he goes to a Kansas City, if he goes to a Minnesota, you could even say Washington, right? Like Omari and Hampton could quite literally be the jewel of the rookie draft.
Yeah, honestly, if I'm looking in drafts and I want to target Omari and Hampton, especially after the NFL draft, like if that's when my rookie draft is, I'm hoping he goes to a place like Washington, where people are gonna be like, oh, they got Brian Robinson. That's because he's gonna outplay Brian Robinson, and it's gonna be very evident very quickly, right? I'm hoping, just because then I get the slide a little bit on Hampton. Whereas, he goes to Kansas City, all of a sudden we're gonna be talking. People are gonna have the conversation: should he go up where Tet is going? Like it's just gonna be that little difference of. I kind of hoping he goes somewhere where there's a little bit of competition, because I think he's gonna be able to beat it out.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to go back to Ohio State here, Ty, with the 109.
Wow.
I'm going to go with Emeka Egbuka.
Okay.
Oh, you thought
I thought you were going to go with Judkins. I was like, whoa.
No. We'll get to Judkins. And I'm nothing against him, but I agree. I think this will be a little early at the 109 the 109 to take him here. But Ty, he's had such an interesting college career. We think back to 2022, his redshirt freshman year, and he had 1,100 yards, 10 touchdowns. We were talking like, could he be one of the better than Olave and Garrett Wilson and JSN? And then battles injury in 2023, only has 500 receiving yards, and then this year, still has 81 receptions, 1,000 yards, and 10 touchdowns, but is the clear number 2 wide receiver behind Jeremiah Smith, who, to be fair, might have been the number 1 overall pick in the NFL draft this year, and he's only a freshman in college. Like Jeremiah Smith is ridiculous. We will be talking about him in 2027 4 days. Like he'll be the topic of discussion then. But Egbuka is going to fit, I think, in the slot very well for a team. I think at his size, right? He's not the greatest route runner, but he's a physical guy, and he gets a lot of yards after catch, and I think a lot of teams can do that. I still think he's going to be a first round pick. If you see him go to a team like Houston, where, Tank's going to be out all 2025, he's playing alongside Nico Collins. I would love that. I'm looking, the Cowboys, him and CeeDee Lamb. I think he's a guy that you kind of want to go where there's a dominant wide receiver 1 on the outside, but there's just not really a wide receiver 2 or a second option to think of. I think that's where he's going to flourish the best. And I think then, if you're taking him here and you're getting that top 15-ish production later down the road, that's kind of what you're shooting for with this pick.
Yeah. Again, literally the first note that I had when I was going through Ibuka's film was a sophomore playing with JSN and Marvin Harrison Jr. Like, the dude has been surrounded by talent. And I think there's a really easy nitpick for people to be like, well, he could never be the wide receiver 1. And it's like, shut up. Like,
I know.
Yeah, look at who he's playing with.
Yes, exactly.
So with Ibuka, him, Matthew Golden from Texas, and Travis Hunter, they could really go any way in drafts because Ibuka is commonly called like the high floor receiver that, like, if you're not looking to bust on a player, then it's going to be Ibuka. Problem is that I didn't really see like a trump card with him, that like there wasn't like a skill set that you could bank on every single play if something were to go wrong, versus Travis Hunter and Matthew Golden. There were other trump cards that they had, but they were, you could say, inconsistent or more likely to be taken out of a play if something were to go wrong. So again, these next 2 players, a little bit of a spoiler, along with Ibuka, they could really go any way in your drafts, and no one should have a gripe about it.
For sure. So I assume you're going wide receiver here with your next pick?
I'm going receiver here. I will go with Matthew Golden. I think that I was very tempted by Travis Hunter because just watching Travis Hunter's wide receiver film, he's my wide receiver 1. Like, Travis Hunter as a receiver is very, very good. The risk that you are taking on then with Travis Hunter is obviously he's going to play the other side of the ball, right? So you don't know how much he's going to be playing on offense, versus Matthew Golden, relatively unknown, probably the most unknown name from all the players that we've taken so far in this little, top 24 mock, you could say. The dude is a route runner and he can separate, but there are some things like he can get pushed out of his route and then he's taken out of it, all that stuff. Like, that's like, we're getting into the weeds of that all. But like Matthew Golden, if you're looking for a route runner, for a guy with a quick and sudden release off the line of scrimmage, he's going to be your guy. Matthew Golden really could be end of the first round, early second round guy. Like, I think a landing spot like the Rams is like whole. If you do move on from Cooper Kupp, or like Matthew Golden is the succession plan to Cooper Kupp, you could even put him in Washington, then put him opposite Terry McLaurin. Could even do Buffalo. Like, like there are some really good landing spots for Matthew Golden. That could push him higher up on the board, because again, with his skill set and some of the teams that he lands on, he could be a very sneaky dynasty asset.
Yeah, and I do think it's good time to point out too, like, if you're hearing us talk of, he can get knocked off his routes, he's not necessarily, the strongest, like, that can change all in a year in the NFL. Obviously, it's you're picking and choosing which weaknesses you're okay with, which strengths you want in a player at this point. And that's kind of what we're doing. If you are listening over on the YouTube, we thank you very much. We ask that you subscribe, because we are putting out so much content and we just want you to be a part of it. We don't want you to miss any of it. We are trying to build the fellowship over there. If you're on the audio podcast, we thank you very much. Maybe you want to check out the YouTube on this one, just because we have the live draft board going on, so it's a little easier to track. All right, we got 2 players left in the first round tie, and I'm going to take the risk here. I am going to go with Travis Hunter right here at the 111. Obviously, it is a risky pick because it could be just lighting a pick on fire. If a team drafts him as corner and says, we like you as a corner, you're going to play as a corner, that's who you are. Maybe down the road you can play wide receiver, and then he just never gets back to it. However, I think he, like you said, is a good enough wide receiver where no matter what team drafts him, he's first of all going to demand that he sees offensive snaps. And I think they'd be silly not to give him offensive snaps. So even if he's playing primarily corner, I think he's still going to have enough utilization that he's at least a usable fantasy asset. Now, if he goes full-time wide receiver, if some team is watching, just like you said, Ty, they're watching, he's the best wide receiver in this class, then all of a sudden you got the steal of the draft. So there is a lot of risk baked into here. I think he's a top 5 pick in this draft. I think he's gone pretty quick. I think one team is just going to go, there's just so much talent here, we have to take him. But yeah, I do think of the one. I just don't think you can let Travis Hunter with the talent he has slide outside the first round.
Yeah, 1000%. I mean, arguably the best player in the draft just because of his skill set and his versatility. That being said, I think, again, when it comes to fantasy, it's just a question of like, is he going to be is he going to only be in on like 3 wide receiver sets because they don't want him playing every down on offense, but he's good enough then when he gets on the field that he's probably going to be racking up a lot of receptions and a lot of yards. But again, it's just a matter of like, how much are we going to get from him?
For sure. All right, Ty, let's wrap up the first round. Who do you got here?
So I could go with a running back here, and that would be recklessly speculating again, just with the landing spots that they would go to. I'm going to go with Colson Loveland here, another tight end. Also another guy that for whatever reason, people are just not in on compared to some of the other players that we're going to be talking about right after him. But Colson Loveland is an interesting one because I think all the teams that we mentioned for Tyler Warren will be in for Loveland, but they won't be in for Loveland when they draft in the first round, right? So, your hope is that like Loveland goes to a Denver, right, where they do need a tight end with his kind of skill set. The Chargers will be another one, like you get the Jim Harbaugh connection with the Michigan connection, all that stuff, right? But if he doesn't go to any of those spots or really any of the late first round spots, Loveland could slide a bit where then he's like early second, mid second round pick, which like if you're one of those like capital only matters kind of people when it comes to these rookies, he's probably going to slide a bit down your board. But I think Loveland, again, is just another athletic receiving threat for a team, again, that if he goes to a Chargers or a Denver, he does become like a top 3 option in their offense immediately. I don't think Loveland is going to go to a spot where they already have an established tight end because I think Loveland is just too good to be someone's backup or to be kind of second fiddle to them. So again, maybe a little bold considering some of the running backs that are still available here, but I'm a fan of Loveland's game.
Ty's a tight end guy. I mean, what can we say?
What can I say?
He knew I was going to drop him down the board, so he had to be the guy to put them where, give them the love because he knew it wasn't going to come from me. But I do think it's a fair spot. Obviously, this is assuming NFL teams are going to see him as a first round pick, which I think both of you and I think he will be. If he is a first round pick, then I definitely think this warrants a first round pick in your fan or rookie drafts. All right, we're going to take a quick break and we're going to hear from our friends over at Underdog Fantasy.
Today's podcast episode is brought to you by our friends over at Underdog Fantasy. Now, we love Underdog. It is the easiest place to play best ball formats, and they even have their own form of player props called Pick'em. You can make up to 20 times your money on a single night by correlating props together. 2 picks will triple your money, 3 will 6 times it, 4 will 10 times it, and 5 plays that all hit will multiply your entry by 20. You can even place insurance on your picks too, so if only 4 of your 5 props hit, you still get 10 times your entry. And if you use our code FELLAS when signing up, Underdog is going to double your first deposit up to $100.
We are back, and we got the second round of your rookie mock drafts, at least what we think they should look like right now before the combine, before the NFL draft. I'll recap what we have so far. We start with Ashton Genty, Ted McMillan, Cam Ward, and Shedeur Sanders to round out the first 4 picks. Then we go Luther Burden, Tyler Warren, Travion Henderson, Omarion Hampton, and then we go Emeka Ibuka, Matthew Golden, Travis Hunter, and Colston Loveland to wrap out the first round. Tom, I'm going to take my third Ohio State player of this draft. I think this is the Quinshon Judkins time. He was the lead back in terms of usage in the Ohio State backfield. Obviously, I think, like I said earlier, Travion Henderson has the skill set. I think it's going to translate a little bit better for him. However, I don't think we can take away from the fact that Judkins had 41 touchdowns in 3 years at Ohio State. The fact that he's, seen 200 carries each of the last 3 seasons. He wasn't bad in the receiving game either, right? I mean, it's not like you're going to look at him as a receiving back. I think what's really going to hold him back is he just doesn't have that same top end speed as we see with Genty, Hampton, Henderson. He's, going to be similar to, if we're looking at the Ohio State backfield as like similar to your, like a Detroit Lions backfield. I'm not calling Henderson Jahmyr Gibbs. I'm not necessarily saying Judkins is David Montgomery, but he is that David Montgomery role, right? He's actually a very good pass blocker. He's, going to be able to get you 4 or 5 yards of carry. He's got the skill set to play 3 downs. It'll just be interesting if a team kind of gives him that opportunity.
Yeah, agreed. And you could say the same thing about my next pick here. So we're just look at that seamless transition. We're going to go with Caleb Johnson from Iowa. Both of these guys are definitely more the David Montgomery to Jahmyr Gibbs, archetype of running back, right? So they're more downhill, they're more power runners, and again, your kind of speedsters and your finesse kind of running backs. Caleb Johnson, again, may not be the most like sexy fantasy prospect because he doesn't offer a whole lot in the receiving game. The lawn speed, like you said, for Quinshon, you could say the same thing for Caleb Johnson. But Caleb Johnson, Quinshon Judkins, they are like pure rushers, right? So when you watch them run with the ball, you feel them through the field. Like you feel just how good they are, right? So both of these guys, I doubt will ever have a backfield to themselves in the NFL, but because of the role that they would have as kind of the tag team partner, where they could be the downhill, they're likely to be on the goal line more often. Early down and short yardage situations will be theirs as well. So they're not going to be like, complete like second fiddles to whoever they're running with, unless again, like you do wind up with like a Bijan Robinson or a Jahmyr Gibbs or any of those kind of running backs. But again, both of these guys are definitely like the next 2 picks because, again, they can be very, very valuable in terms of the roles that they have on their teams.
Definitely. I'm going to go with quarterback here, Ty.
Oh,
I'm going to go Jackson Dart.
Oh, boy.
I think Jackson Dart is going to be the quarterback that we see just get pushed up draft boards because teams are always the same. They're always QB hungry. I think he's going to be the guy that could sneak into the first round. Maybe an early second round pick, right? If Tennessee passes on quarterback right away, grabbing Jackson Dart at the beginning of the second round, I could see. If the Rams move on from Matthew Stafford and don't land to Sam Darnold, could see them going Jackson Dart. I think he's a talented enough guy. I think he's, his legs help him out enough that he is going to get an opportunity to start in the NFL. I think that he can make things happen. Obviously, I think he's got a lot of stuff that he has to clean up as well, right? I think sometimes he can get, his mechanics aren't always the greatest. He's not there's this reason I should say that he's not in the Cam Ward, Shedeur Sanders conversation as of right now. But I think if he finds the right spot, the only thing you have to worry about with Dart here is you could just not see him the first year, right? He's definitely a candidate to sit behind someone. But I do think that he, especially in a super flex, is worth a pick here. I do also want to say with quarterbacks, if you're listening to this and you're like, I'm not in a super flex league, this doesn't matter, just take the quarterbacks out, right? The rest of the order is going to be the same if you're not in a super flex. Quarterbacks out, move everybody up a couple spots to where the quarterback should be, and that's how we would see a non-super flex league. But what's your thought on Jackson Dart this high, Ty?
He's the one quarterback where landing spot is really going to dictate like how high he goes or how low he goes, right? If he goes to a team like Vegas or like Cleveland, Gosh, that's a horrible way to start it off. If he goes to a Cleveland, the Giants, a team that does need a quarterback that will need him to play right away, I think he will go higher. But if he goes to a Vegas where it's like now he's in a QB competition, right, for a team that can go out and sign a Sam Darnold or go trade for a Kirk Cousins and he's in a QB competition, I think he's going to slide just a bit. But at the same time, since we're doing a super flex mock draft, I understand the spot because again, you're calling your shot essentially that Jackson Dart does play within a year or two, and that when he does play, he does give you enough value to keep him in your lineups as a super flex option. I can't get behind the people that say that he's a QB1 in this class. I feel like it's just because they're looking for something to argue with. But
yep. No, I agree with that.
He's a fine prospect.
Definitely. Alrighty, Ty. And we got the 4th pick of the 2nd round. What direction are you going with this one?
We're going to go pass catcher here. We're going to go with Alec or Elick, however you want to say it, Ayomanor from Stanford. The dude is smooth, 6'2", 200 pounds-ish. That's at least what he was listed at Stanford. For his size to be as smooth of a route runner as he is, I think there is some intrigue there. Now, he's not the fastest guy in the world by any means, but I think he can find himself in a pretty sweet situation depending on the team that he goes to. You know, he could sneak into the very end of the 1st round. So you could see a team like Washington, right, that wants a more physical, a more bigger receiver to complement a Terry McLaurin. I don't think Buffalo would be a great spot for him with Keon Coleman. Kansas City could be interesting just because of what receivers could be walking out the door. But then, you know, at the beginning of the 2nd round, he could find himself in a team like Cleveland, could find himself in New England or wherever he is, where you're like, he's going to be targeted quite a bit because they have really no one else to throw to. So again, he's very similar to Emeka Egbuka in the sense that like there's not a trump card, right? But at the same time, you look at size and profile, you do figure that you add in landing spot, like he could be like a 1st or 2nd year kind of contributor on your fantasy team just because they got no one else on his team.
No, and I agree with that. I think that's a good way to put it. If there's no trump card, there's no quality that you're like, this is why. But at the same time, he's been so solid. You know, he's been fluid in everything that he's doing that you're just like, I see the potential for him in the NFL, especially if the landing spot ends up being right. I'm going to go with another pass catcher. I'm going to go with Trey Harris here. I know I've like picked just a couple teams here, Ty. I've gone Ohio State. You really don't like this one, do you? Ty is very against this one. All right, so we'll have to see. So for me, like I understand Trey Harris has a lot of shortcomings compared to the other wide receivers we've had so far, right? I don't think that he's polished in the way that the rest of these wide receivers are. But I think that the upside, the big playability, the fact that in only 8 games this season before he, was hit with injury, had 1,000 yards, 7 touchdowns. I think that if he finds a situation, if like I would love to see him with Dave Canales. I would love to see him in Tampa Bay. I think that he could really flourish. But I understand that at the same time, right? He could just be like another Christian Watson, where he's got great size, he's got good speed, he's got everything there. It just doesn't come together. So I understand, but in the middle of the 2nd round here, I'm willing to take that shot on that upside. So that is why, I'm okay with taking Trey Harris here.
Oh man. Where do I start?
Ty was not ready for that one. He was not happy with that one.
Not ready at all. Trey Harris is a pretty polarizing prospect. Either you're in on him or you're out on him.
For sure.
I find myself to be more out on him because I say this as a warning to you, the listener, that if you hear, size, a big receiver coming out of Ole Miss and your thoughts are instantly like next DK Metcalf, next AJ Brown, boy, we need to slow the roll a bit on that then. I think there is a lot of developing that Trey Harris needs to go through. There are traits that he has, but he has to develop. So if you're looking for an immediate contributor on the outside or for a pass catcher, Trey Harris isn't going to be your guy. But when you look at just from a prospect standpoint, again, either you're going to be in or you're going to be out on him. I find myself to be more out on Trey Harris. Now, that being said, like everyone has, a spot in a rookie draft, right? Like Trey Harris, if he was to be, if he falls to like early third round, I'll absolutely take the shot. I don't know if I could talk myself into Trey Harris really anywhere in the second round of a rookie draft.
Well, that was Ty's way of politely telling me that I'm an idiot and he hates it. We'll see. I think for me in the second round, once you start getting here, I'm okay taking more shots on upside. And I think that's just where the difference is. Ty's still looking at it as I see holes here. I don't think he's quite the same. I know I'm going to foreshadow my next pick is also going to make Ty upset. So I'll let him take his and then we'll get to my next one in a little bit. But Ty, who do you have as what would be the 206?
I've got Dylan Sampson, the running back out of Tennessee, because I think Sampson is another one of these complementary running backs that he could find himself in a very, very good situation on a good offense. Because I think there are going to be some of these early round teams, like the bad teams that don't exactly think that Dylan Sampson is going to, he's not going to be the guy that they can give a workload to right out of the gate, because that's just not the player that he is. But if he were to go to a team, again, recklessly speculating here, goes to a Minnesota, he goes to a Cincinnati, finds himself in Chicago, wherever, again, where he can be a complimentary back. I think Sampson is in play for some big plays then. I like his talent as well. He's not the biggest, most physical running back. But again, like you said with Trey Harris, like you're calling your shots at this point in the rookie draft. I would call my shot in Dylan Sampson because, again, I think he can get on the field right away in a good situation.
Yeah, I think I think Judkins, Caleb Johnson ends that tier. And now we're in a wide open tier as far as running backs. Where landing spot's going to matter. We got a lot of these guys who are going to be, later day 2, early day 3 guys. You're hoping, if you take Dylan Sampson now, you're hoping he's a day 2 guy, right? You're hoping he's a second or third round pick. You're hoping he finds a landing spot. So at this point, you really are just betting on talent if you're drafting before the NFL draft for these players. You're going, this is the player I like. These are the traits I like to see. This is what I'm taking. You're not worried about kind of how they would fit necessarily. You're going, okay, this is what I'm looking for. Ty, I think it's time. I know you disagree.
Oh, Lord.
But I'm going with tight end here. I'm going Harold Fannin Jr. Ty hates him. He thinks he's undersized. He thinks he can't play at the NFL level. He thinks he's not a blocker.
Wow. Wow.
Which could be true, right? He is only 6'4", or he's only 230 pounds as a tight end. Like we talked about Tyler Warren. Tyler Warren's got almost 30 pounds on him at 2 inches. So that there is that, size discrepancy there. But the dude had 117 receptions for 1,500 yards and 10 touchdowns. In his 2 games against top 25 competition, he had 19 catches for 282 yards and 2 touchdowns. They used him all over the field. I understand if you're watching it, some people are probably going, this is just another Kyle Pitts. He looks like he can be a great wide receiver. You're great catching the ball, but he can't actually be on the field because he's not a wide receiver, so he doesn't have that explosion. He's not going to be a great blocker. I don't know. I think just the way that they used him just showed he can do it all. He can do anything that you ask him to, across the field. I think Kyle Pitts was just so athletically gifted that we just overlooked some of like the ways that he can, his route running and different things like that. Whereas, I think Harold Fannin, I just think he is going to be good enough at tight end, good enough as a receiving threat that teams are just going to have to put him on the field for whoever drafts him.
Interesting. I think the best way to describe Fannin is that I don't think it's, too preposterous to say that he's got a wide range of outcomes, because
Yeah, he definitely does.
he's got to find the perfect spot. And I mean, like, the most perfect spot in order to contribute right away. That being said, like, not going to rule out the possibility that he can just earn his way onto the field, because every player has that opportunity, or at least should get that opportunity. For me, when I look at tight ends and I look at Fannin, and I'm like, man, he is only receiving. Like, that's where you're going to get the most out of him. I find him to be a second fiddle kind of tight end that is not going to be tight end one right out of the gate. I find him to, again, second fiddle. You could, make an argument for a team like the Cardinals, right, that just need another pass catcher in some capacities. You could also argue then the Vikings outside of TJ Hawkinson, just because you're not getting a whole lot out of Josh Oliver and Johnny Munt. You could say Houston, right? Houston would be another one with Dalton Schultz. The Rams would be interesting a little bit too. Like, again, the landing spot is really going to matter for me, at least when it comes to Harold Fannin.
For sure. No, that makes sense. And, it'd be interesting to see how NFL teams value him. If he creeps up end of the first, if he falls, beginning of all the way down to like the beginning of the third, right? It'll be just interesting, like how teams decide they want to approach Harold Fannin. Tyler, we got 5 picks left. So why don't you give it to us? Who are you taking here?
I'm going to take Isaiah Bond, receiver out of Texas, just because I think this dude is just, again, a big play waiting to happen. He's not the biggest receiver you've ever seen, but he is quick and he is fast. I think he can find a role somewhere as a wide receiver 3, wide receiver 2, even maybe on certain teams where, again, big play waiting to happen. Nothing more outside of that, really. You're just, again, calling a shot on just things going right for Isaiah Bond.
Yeah, I don't know what I was going to say. I just completely lost my train of thought. So we're going to move with that. We're going to move on, and I'm going to agree with you there. And you know what, Ty, I'm going to buy into you. Were talking to me a little bit about Matthew Berry's
football name
theory. And I'm going to buy into it a little bit here. I'm going to take my guy, my namesake, Mr. Cam Scattaboo. Right here. I think there's always going to be a place for running backs who are just grinders on teams. And I think that's really what if you got anything from him, especially if you just watch college football playoffs, is that this dude is a grinder. It's that he wants to run through a wall for you. It'll be interesting to see, right, how that necessarily translates if he, is going to be able to perform at the NFL level. But he is 5'11", 215 pounds. He, is definitely a great runner. We saw he has pass catching abilities. I wouldn't necessarily call him a receiving back by any means, but he does have decent pass catching ability. But again, kind of like you talked about with Samson, this is going to really depend on where he lands, what a team is, looking to use him for. But if I'm going to kind of bet on a running back, I'm going to bet on Cam at this spot.
I agree.
All right. 3 picks left, Ty. Who do you got?
I got Jack Besh from TCU here. I just think when you get to this point in rookie drafts, I know we talked about calling shots. I think the best shot that you can take with a pass catcher are these possession receivers that have good hands, that are going to be a quarterback's best friend, and that is Jack Besh, because, again, you throw the ball in his direction, there's a good chance that he comes down with it because of his size and physicality. A lot of people will give him the comp of Puka Nacua because, again, like, they play very similarly in the sense that, like, he's going to be a quarterback's best friend. I think that's a bit lazy, I'll be honest. But because I'll clarify why, because I don't think Jack Besh is the route runner that Puka Nacua was as well. But again, Jack Besh, I see as a prospect, he's going to get on the field pretty early in his career, because, again, I think coaches are going to find a way, are going to want him on the field because they trust him more than some of these other kind of wide receiver threes that can be inconsistent at times and aren't the most, they don't want on the field all the time. Jack Bech could find his way onto the field very, very quickly.
Yeah, no. And man, I am just completely losing my train of thought. Every time I go to speak, I'm trying to think ahead of what I want to say, and I'm not at all ready for when you bring it back to me. So with that, I'm just going to transition my guy. I'm going to take another quarterback here. I'm going to go Jalen Milroe. And I understand if you're like, there's no way this guy sees the NFL field. But I do think at the same time, he's got such a crazy upside as a rusher that if he does see a couple of seasons, right, we could see just fantasy production that you're like kind of comes out of nowhere. He's got so much developing that he would need to do as an NFL quarterback. So I get it if you're like, I can't take this because I feel like there's a good chance you're lighting your pick on fire, that even if he is a second round pick, he just never sees the NFL field, that if he's a third round pick, there's no way. I understand that, but at the same time, I saw you just see so much talent oozing from this guy that it would be interesting to see if he can get in an offense where they're going to look to utilize him. Again, I think for sure he's not starting year one. All right. I do not think there's any way that an NFL team throws him out in the field unless, they just have such a, tremendous need or injuries happen. But just with the rushing upside, I think you could see him come in. Maybe it's just for a couple of years, the Justin Fields-esque run of not great for NFL, but they're just giving this guy an opportunity and he puts up fantasy points. I like him on my team.
Interesting. I think it's a matter of like, do you think Jalen Milroe sees the field within 3 years? If you do, you'll probably take him here. If you don't, he's probably not going to be really on your radar like at all.
No,
and
100%.
That's where I found myself.
100%. And that, he's one too that you could, once that NFL draft hits, you're pretty much either in or out on Jalen Milroe heading forward, because a team could definitely take him to just be a backup. That he is strictly a backup. Maybe they give him a couple like almost like Marcus Mariota packages like Washington did this season but at the same time, he could go to an offense where he's got a chance, to be a starting quarterback. So he will definitely be interesting. Ty, wrap out the second round for us here.
I'm going to take Xavier Restrepo from Miami, a really slot only wide receiver because he just does not have ideal size. That being said, though, the dude will get open for you, right? Mm-hmm. I think a lot of people may see him similar to like a Demario Douglas kind of fantasy outlook, just because, again, like smaller receiver, at least like Restrepo had the production in college versus some of these other kind of slot receivers that we've seen the fantasy community try to push up the board because they're like, he is such a good route runner. Again, I think Restrepo, slot only receiver, but he's going to be open. He's also going to be a QB's friend as well in 3 wide receiver sets. So again, just calling a shot here that, again, he's going to find, a situation where he can be, again, slot exclusive, but in 3 wide receiver sets on a pass happy team.
For sure. I mean, and sometimes it helps in the second round to have a guy who's got such a defined role like this, where it's not just a team taking him, hoping that he pans out somewhere. Whoever takes him here knows he's our slot wide receiver. He's who we're hoping, in 2 years is the guy that kind of takes over this spot. So I do think that helps a little bit in the second round. Obviously, you're going to be limited to that, like you said. I mean, he could look really good all of a sudden, and then you just have like a Jaden Reed situation where you're like, this dude is good. He performs, but he's never on the field, so I can't trust him. But at the end of the second round, at the same time, that's not the worst problem to have if you have a guy who does produce and has a role that he's going into. So I definitely like this pick here. All righty, Ty, that wraps it up for us on this top 2 rounds of your rookie mock drafts. We got some prospect comps coming up next week for running backs and wide receivers. That's always a fun one. Some draft sleepers, players to trade for rookie picks. We got a lot of different content coming up in the next couple of weeks, especially if you are all in on the rookies right now. like we are. Make sure that you're subscribed. Make sure you're following along. But yeah, we'll see you next week. If you want to follow us on the socials, Tyler's at Tyler_Plath. I'm at Camel FFF. Fellas are at FFFellas on X. The FFFellas on Instagram. Fantasy Football Fellas on YouTube, Facebook, and TikTok. Fantasy Football Fellas shorts if you want our short form content over on YouTube. All right, we will see you later. Deuces.
Deuces.